Welcome to The Critical Path, Greater Vancouver Realtors podcast exploring professionalism and innovation in real estate. I'm your host, Jesse Lalime, and every month we'll sit down with industry leaders to discuss critical issues and the paths we must take to overcome them. Now, realtors today are more than brokers. You're neighborhood experts, relationship builders, valuation specialists, negotiators, problem solvers, and market analysts. Your clients trust you to provide the latest on market trends. Are prices going up? Are interest rates going down? Is it a seller's or buyer's market? So, where do you get your data and analysis? Financial institutions? The government? YouTube? What about your professional association? At GVR, Andrew Lis is our Director of Economics and Data Analytics. His small but mighty economics and data team are on a mission to be your trusted source for market analytics, and they've taken the first step with the rollout of a new economics microsite. I'm excited to have Andrew join us today and give us his insights on how you can leverage data to your benefit. Welcome to The Critical Path, Andrew.
Thanks, Jesse. That was a great intro. Appreciate it.
Yes, I've been honing it carefully for the last 5 minutes.
But I like how you guys don't tell me what the intro is first, so it comes as a nice surprise. It's very refreshing.
We have to keep an element of surprise for our guests here on The Critical Path.
Great.
Andrew, I just want to get right into it because, you know, when we first met, when you were hired almost 2 years ago now, you and I sat down, we worked on a little bit of a piece to introduce yourself to the members, and you were telling me about data telling stories and how data can tell us a lot about the world around us. So let's revisit that a little bit for our members and just tell us a little bit about your ethos on data and how it helps to inform the world around us.
Sure. That is a reminder that it is about 2 years now that I've been here. So, yeah, you know, the idea with data for me, there's a couple elements to that question. So, like the data as storytelling is one, but then there's like a whole element around data itself, what it is and why should we care about it. So, maybe let's start with the part around the storytelling, which, you know, I think from my perspective, coming in here as a new person in this organization about now 2 years ago, I looked around at what we had available to members in terms of our stats and the things we publish, and I think there's some good things and some areas that we were sort of missing. And the parts for me that I think we're missing were around the storytelling part of it. Of like we provide members with stats and we provide them with good information about what the average price is or how many sales there were, but the context behind it and the kind of messaging around, well, what does that mean really? And like, why are the numbers the way that we see them? And how do they end up becoming that? So that's the storytelling part there that I enjoy around this, is like uncovering those stories from the data. It's not just sitting there in plain sight. Usually it requires having some kind of general understanding of like the wider picture. It helps to have some understanding of policy context, macroeconomic trends, all these kinds of things. But I like kind of weaving those things together, and trying to find some kind of interesting story that we put out and members can either use or just listen and enjoy. Like sometimes it's maybe the end goal isn't to actually use this as a product for a member to provide to a client. It's sometimes just for their own self-education or information. But then it comes back to the part around the data itself, and like there's an interesting thought around that I think about is that there's different kinds of data, and the kind of data that we deal with here at GVR these days is sort of like, well, we have this transactional data in the MLS, right? So we know there's listings, there's sales, those will translate into things like average prices. We can munge these data in various ways. There's other data that's attached to that, macroeconomic data, socioeconomic data, this kind of thing, and that kind of data is a lot different than the kind of data you might get in something like, I don't know, a financial market where you get tick by tick stock market information. You have really high frequency, high quality data, or maybe you're measuring how often a bearing fails in a factory or something like that, right? Like that's a very different kind of data, and that kind of data is very precise and has a lot of aspects to it that you can really identify as being clear and very easy to predict, or it's very useful for a lot of kind of mechanical kind of tasks. But markets actually don't work in mechanical ways, and a lot of people like to think they do. And oftentimes you'll hear it reduced to that in sort of media pieces and stuff because that's the simple way to communicate things. Oh, it's supply and demand, X, the little supply and demand curve or whatever, right? And it works to a degree, but in the kind of data that we deal with, it's a lot messier. The data generating process underneath it is a lot different than what you might find when you're measuring bearing failure rates or something. There's a lot of diversity behind it, and for me, one of the interesting things about the storytelling element of it is uncovering those data generating processes. Like when somebody makes a sale or lists a property, there's some story behind it. Somebody came to that agent with a property or some, and there's some story behind. There's some life story and everything, and all of that is really interesting. And when you aggregate these things and we look at it from some sort of numerical basis, that too starts telling a story because it's built on the stories behind those numbers. So that's kind of my thinking around these numbers and why I like to do what I try to do. And again, I just try to put a little bit of a different spin on it instead of just always being the this is going up, that's going down kind of thing. I try to add a little bit more to it.
It helps to be more relatable, right? Because
Yeah.
then that really drives it home for people. And I think that's probably something for our members where, like you mentioned, there's so much data, right? And it can be really almost intimidating to kind of try and think about it and to find those linkages for those pieces that can connect to tell more of a story, right?
Totally.
What is this kind of your perspective, because you've been here for 2 years now and have really kind of put your stamp on it. What is this meant for kind of the shift in our outlook on data and statistics and what we're doing for our members?
Yeah, so there's kind of a short-term impact and then a longer-term one that hasn't quite materialized publicly quite yet, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So the short-term side of it is that I've come here and obviously I do things a little bit differently in case people haven't noticed. I'm slightly, I'm not your typical economist, or at least I don't think I am. And if I am to other people, well, then I need to change my game because I definitely don't want to be the typical economist.
That's why we love you here,
Yeah,
Andrew.
so I quite actively try to push against the sort of norms of my so-called profession. There's a lot of things I don't totally agree with some of the way that things get talked about housing and all of these issues. I just think there's a lot of nuance that gets lost in the conversation. It's important, I think, to informing the conversation in a responsible way. How is that? So how does this change our outlook here? Is like, well, I'm bringing a bit of a different lens to everything that we talk about. And, my time is unfortunately a bit thin here. I'd love to produce a million more pieces than I do. But when I do sit down to write or make a video or something, I do try to put a lot of thought into it about what it is that somebody would want to understand in a deeper way so that that's going to help them either do their job better, whether that's selling or, buying real estate, whatever it may be, or if it's somebody in the public or the media to try to understand these issues in a deeper way so that it's, when they're trying to have a conversation about, I'm worried about the future, I'm worried about this or that, or, well, they can look to these pieces and say, okay, well, I think I understand it at a more macro level, or I kind of understand it in a bigger picture context. And I understand there's all these variables that we can't always perfectly account for everything. And sometimes you just got to take risks in life and things. So I guess like coming back to how has that changed things? Well, I guess it's just a bit of a different story than what we've historically always done here, right? Like when I look, like I said, when I got here, our traditional outlets for statistics is we still do them, and I love doing them actually, is our monthly press releases, right? But that's just a stats package. It's just some numbers and so on, and some media quotes, which again I do enjoy. I actually really love doing. That's one of the little secret here. It's actually one of my favorite things to do when that time comes around. The first of the month, I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta
Cooking some quotes
yeah,
up in
I've
the
been
lab.
cooking quotes, trying to kind of build that bit of a different perspective into things in the shorter term. Now, that longer term piece that I was alluding to is there's hidden work under the surface that I'm doing here that, and it's not hidden as in like, oh, it's not sanctioned by the, like it's like hidden in that it's all back end work. Like we're working very, very hard in the back end to create new data pipelines and all kinds of things. So we really need to modernize the infrastructure for the purposes of analysis. Now, we have data and stuff set up for other purposes here, like with MLS and all that. It's all there. The data's there. But that format isn't necessarily the best format for doing analytics on. So we're kind of working in the back end to optimize that so that we can build new tools and products and things like that down the road that won't break, that'll be very like efficient, they'll be cost effective, and they'll be things that we can change in response to feedback from users. Historically, the model here, as I understand it, has largely been to go to third parties for a lot of this work because we're just not an organization that historically has had a huge amount of like computer programmers or something. But my little group is a couple of programmers, and we're kind of scrappy, and we're trying to do a lot of things on our own. So might have some rough edges around some of the products we release, but we're working on it. We're developing things, and we're modifying things as we go. Like it's an iterative process. It's not something where we're going and paying infinite amounts of money, waiting 2 years for some consultants or something to come together with some product, and then we get the product, and it's not, by that time, it's not quite what anybody really wants. So we're trying to change that model to something that's a lot more responsive, a lot more forward thinking and set up for the future. And there's just a lot more data floating around in the world these days, and our existing infrastructure isn't quite set up right now, although this is part of that back end work I'm talking about. It's currently not quite set up to capture a lot of that information and integrate it with these other the sources that we have. So that's like a big piece that I'm working on, which it says hidden until it isn't. One day, people will just be like, wow, that's a cool product they rolled out. It's like, well, yeah, that's 2 years of work toiling away, programming stuff in the background, but that's what we're working towards here.
Well,
so
that's what you need to do for these things too, right?
yeah, you got to put you got to put in the work. There's like it's one of those things with data work. It's a pretty common I don't know, I guess it's kind of a joke in the industry or something. Sort of. It's like most people will look from the outside. They'll look at somebody called like a data scientist or something. Oh, that's really cool. You must make all kinds of cool data stuff all day. It's like, no, 90% of the job is data cleaning and building the appropriate pipelines and stuff. The 10% of it is the fun stuff, getting a chart or a blog post or whatever. It takes all that preparation work on the data side to actually get the data in a format that's usable for your purposes and says what you really think it says. You know what I mean? You can trip yourself up with data pretty easily if you don't have it set up right too. So, that's a lot of that work is like I said, it's kind of this hidden stuff that's going on in the background. It's very active of a project, so that's why I'm not as prolifically writing and things as I was when I first came in. I had a lot more time to do that when I first came in, but now I'm pivoting a little bit more to trying to build this back end until that's built, and then I can pivot back to doing more of the storytelling and all that stuff because that's just what it takes.
It's a process. It's a slow process, but it's a steady process. And again, it deserves the time that it needs to come out the right way.
Totally.
Andrew, in your opinion, what do you think are the most critical data for realtors to be paying attention to?
That's a very good question. Well, I would probably say it's not really a data set or anything at all. It's actually the data. So data, you could think of it as, most people think you say data, they think spreadsheet right away. But that's not like, data comes from all over the place. So every day you walk down the street or something, you observe something regularly. Well, that's a point of data in your head, right? It's something you remember. It's a pattern or whatever. It's something recorded. And I think for realtors, one of the most important data that they can possibly monitor is the pulse of the market, like their clients. It's like, that's the data that you should care about is what are they up to? What are people up to? Are they choosing to move? Are they scared to move? Or what about how are interest? Because by the time I write something about, say, interest rates or something like that, well, there'll be many members out there who've already been dealing with clients who've been struggling with interest rates or something. They're already at the forefront of that story. I'm basically telling you old news by that point in time, right? So it's kind of, I would say that's really where the key bits of information are that realtors can pick up on. You could really like be at the bleeding edge of what is happening in the market by truly understanding client needs and their patterns. And, especially for agents and stuff who've been around long enough, right? They'll have acquired a lot more data themselves on, the patterns. Oh, this is just like the 80s or something. So, I think that's a really important way to look at it. That's a bit of a weasel out of a question, I'll admit. But if I had to answer, if I had to pick a data set or something that exists that realtors can look at, I would say, for me, the one variable I think is one of the most important ones for understanding where the market is at is inventory. Like I said that I think when I first started, it's just really, for me, that's just the variable that matters the most. When there's lots of inventory, prices don't tend to rise. When there's not a lot of inventory, prices tend to go up. It's a pretty simple story, and that's why I look to that one. for the most part, because it's really the easiest one to understand. It has a very long time series. We can go back all the way to probably the 1980s or something with it in some of our data. So, we can get a lot of context from that. It's just a very valuable indicator, and you can say a lot about where the market is probably at by only knowing that one variable.
I think a big thing for our members too is locality, right? Because they often tend to be so focused on specific areas. So that's another kind of key focus in terms of data, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was sort of alluding to with the point with, members. The best data point they can focus on is their clients, because they'll be the people operating in their local region,
It
right?
tells
And
them that
that's going
story.
to tell you the story of what's going on in your local market area. And that's one of the interesting things about our data too. Like, I'll get, comments and questions from members sometimes. They'll say, oh, well, you guys report aggregate level stats. That doesn't really jive with my market. Now, it's an interesting perspective because there's kind of two ways of looking at that. Like, it in a sort of very strict sense, it's true, like to some degree, because those aren't the same numbers. So of course it's not the same data set, right? But in another way of looking at it is it's not exactly true, because the data has to be to some degree correlated, because the aggregate data is built from these little local market areas. It's built from those data points. It's all of them added up. So every little local market area story together makes some big aggregate market story. And the interesting thing about that is you'll find if you like doing statistics on your own and stuff like that, well, you can run some correlation analysis, and depending on the periods of time you're looking at, you'll find that the aggregate level data will be highly correlated with a lot of local market area data. So, generally speaking, that's kind of part of why we report out the big aggregate level market trends, because those are generally prevalent just about everywhere to some degree. Now, of course, there's nuance to that, and that's where the real benefit of having an agent comes in, is that they understand that. And it's like, well, yes, prices are maybe going up 2% over here, but in this submarket, for what this client's looking for, hasn't been that way for, X number of years or something, right? So that's really where that local expertise comes in. And again, paying attention to your clients, the product type available in your market, really understanding it at that kind of micro data level, that's hugely valuable. And it's something that's hard for me to do, because I would have to study every single submarket locality in painstaking detail, which I kind of do to a degree, but
You can go deep down the rabbit hole.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of dynamic of always trying to be aware of these larger, broader trends and situating your local, market area in that context. Again, they don't always perfectly jive, but they often rhyme a lot more than they don't. So just something to think about.
So knowing this, and that our members are so kind of focused on this, the areas in which they're working, let's get into the new economics microsite and how this new tool will help our members really paint a picture for their clients at that level.
Yeah, sure. So the site is part of, that's sort of like a first glimpse at some of this back end that I was talking about. Now, that isn't like the whole thing, and it's powered by some of that back end. Is sort of, that's the innovation there. And while that site, I know it's a bit bare bones, and it's not like the greatest thing that anybody ever saw, that's for sure. I never was marketing it that way. But it represents more than just a little site. It represents a shift in the mentality here internally of how we do things, of how we're going to build our stats out and how we're going to do things. So it marks a pivoting point of saying, okay, instead of other people doing this for us, we're going to do this ourselves. And we're going to get better and better and better at this. And we're going to make this product better and better and better over time. And eventually, if this product isn't the right product, we'll build a better one. And we'll, there's, one of the things that eventually we'll get to is something where there'd be kind of a members only site with far more advanced analytics and things like that behind it. But again, we have to set up that infrastructure properly to be able to power that. So we've got some of the early beginnings of that, and that's what this microsite partially represents. And it's there to help, not just members, but the public and media. We get so many requests from media and public. Hey, I need the last 10 years of data for this, for some news piece or this or that. Well, every time somebody has to go and pull that for a news or publication or something, well, that's staff hours. Why don't we just have it on the site. That's one thing there that somewhat selfishly like saving my own time here, but it's efficient from a kind of organizational perspective, right? But it's also about building some transparency and rapport with public and media and stuff too, because I think a lot of boards historically have been somewhat cagey with their data and things, and I understand why. We obviously don't want to just open up the entire MLS as like an open source thing. However, we also don't want to be so closed that nobody comes to us for information, right? So there's a balance. And so in my view, things that we publish historically, like our aggregate level statistics and all of these things, a lot of this should be already publicly available for consumption. Of course, we want, agents to have clients come to them for that very specific local market area content, and something like the micro site I view as a sort of just like an entry point to that conversation of somebody maybe been thinking about buying a home. They could end up on the microsite. Oh, cool. Look, the market's doing this. Oh, well, I should reach out to an agent or something, maybe hoping that that's kind of part of the thought process that helps drive traffic that way. But it's also a flexible format platform where we built a blog into it, as well as these kinds of static components that are like, we've got some interactive analytics that you can go on there. You can check out some charts of where the market's at, and it updates, refreshes every month. And there's some downloadable products in there that you can get, the raw data itself. There's also this chart book product that we built that's just a compendium of charts that we created it because people asked for it. They said, we got a lot of people writing in saying, hey, I got to go scrounge all over the internet to get X number of charts to put in my presentation. And then they look all goofy because they don't have the same formatting and whatever. And it just looks, so I was like, well, this seems like a fairly solvable problem. Why don't we just make a book of charts for people so they can clip it into things? And so, this is kind of the thinking behind this site. It's like a problem solving device to some degree, right? It's like, as I hear feedback from people, I will develop pieces and not just, it might be a blog post, or it might be a tool, it might be something like Chartbook, might be some other thing that I might add into the site that serves that need. It's part of like an open dialogue and a conversation with our membership. So, that's really where that's the idea behind it, and that's where we're kind of going with it.
I was just going to follow up with that. What has the member feedback been like? What have you heard from members so far about?
So far, so good. We've certainly had some people who've inquired and say, well, I don't really love the way this looks or that, and that's great. That's part of the conversation that we want to start. We want to hear, the feedback so that we can be responsive to it. One of the things that we heard is like some of it's not, mobile friendly enough. I love that comment because it's hard to build stuff for mobile, and we are building things for mobile, but it's difficult, right? And it's like the small format of a phone is tough to put, interactive charts and things in that. But we're working on it, and it's part of that conversation. If nobody writes in to say that they don't like this or that, well, then it's hard to know, right? We do have some inclination or some ideas about what we think people will like, but it doesn't always resonate that way. But generally speaking, in a more positive tone, I mean, as far as I know, like Mark's pulled stats for me on the site, it's like getting quite a lot of hits. Like a lot of things are downloading on there. Like seems like it's getting quite a lot of traction for a site that small that was, again, built on like basically a shoestring budget of almost zero. Like I don't even know if we're paying almost anything for it aside from the staff hours to produce it. So, it's really like a very high return on investment from my perspective there for such a small little thing, right?
Especially when you consider it's really in its infancy at this point, right? And it's going to, like you said, evolve and grow over time and be more useful. Let's focus on some of the other stuff that's coming, because the microsite obviously has been a big piece of work now. But moving forward, what are some of the other new products and services you and your team are working on that members might be able to kind of keep on the lookout for?
Yeah, for sure. So, some of it's top secret, but no, kidding. I mean, well, to a degree, some of it is kind of secret. Like we're working on some stuff in the back end. As I alluded to earlier, we've got all this like back end work that's happening, that's setting up the future of products and things that we're going to build. Now, I can't say what all of those are specifically going to be at this exact moment, because it hinges to a degree on what the outcomes are of that back end work. How far can we push that? Can we get to a point where, because I mean, there's levels of this conversation, right? Like, well, I mean, do we get our data and everything to a stage like Google and OpenAI level where we're, like, we're building, or do we just get it to a stage where we're, can make a lot better reports and charts? And I think, there's a progression. And so I would view it as, the things that to keep an eye out for in the near future is going to be sort of the stuff at the shorter end of that progression curve, where, okay, well, you could probably start expecting some nicer looking reports, probably some that are formatted a little bit better with maybe some new charts and some new information and some new better data and stuff in there. You'll probably be able to interact with some of this information on something like the microsite. If we get far enough, maybe a year from now or something, maybe that's optimistic, but I'm sort of hopeful that maybe we have a kind of gated site for members only that has a lot more deeper advanced analytics that members will have access to. Perhaps, just kind of spitballing here, something where, a member could go into the site and say, hey, well, I want this stat and that stat and this stat, and I want it in this format, and they push a button and boom, it's all there. So you could pick and choose your report or something. That would be, choose your own adventure sort of thing, right? So that would be an amazing leap forward for us. And, at that way further out end of the progression, it would be something like, well, let's start integrating like machine learning and AI into some of our data to augment the quality of it. Here's one of the dirty truths about our MLS data that I'll just say openly. It's not that clean under the hood of it. And by clean, I mean we have data that isn't formatted very neatly, which means it's very hard to use in a kind of from an analytical standpoint. If you have something that's supposed to be numbers in some column, but there's strings of text in there, suddenly that data becomes very difficult to use. And because the data has gone through so many iterations of different systems over time that allowed different forms of entry in different fields, we have this kind of like long-standing issue that there's some data cleaning issues that need to happen. And that's where tools like AI and machine learning and stuff can start to help, because with millions and millions and millions of records, it's difficult for a human to go in there and do them one by one, right? It might take a really long time. So then once you get clean data, then you can do all kinds of things with it. Then you can really unleash some really powerful stuff. So you could do some, machine learning kind of modeling that could help you with doing valuation on properties or something like that. We could get to that level, but without clean data, it's the garbage in, garbage out problem, right? So you first got to solve that. You build your infrastructure, you make everything nice and clean, and then you can build all the cool, fun stuff that exists. And we're in a amazing time to be alive too, right? Like this AI and all this stuff out there now, it's accelerating so quickly. There's so many things that we'll be able to create in the near future that we probably couldn't even have created 2 or 3 years ago, that are now sort of like accessible to a small team like mine or something, whereas before it might have taken a team of 20 developers to do something like that. So we're really at a pretty exciting time. I'm excited about all the things we're going to be doing, and so keep an eye out and watch for the blog too. I'm going to be doing some new content. I keep joking, I got season 2 of The Lead coming out at some point. I'm just super, super busy with a lot of other things at the moment, so I haven't had as much time for that, but that is definitely on the list of to-dos. I can't wait to launch that. We've, of course, got our new branding and everything, so I've been trying to think up a kind of fun way of remarketing that a little bit or something. So, lots of stuff should be coming out from us in the future, and I'll plug we'll be doing I'm not sure when this will air, but hopefully before June, July, because we should be doing some kind of, market update forecast kind of thing somewhere around the summer there. We usually do on the residential market. Probably won't roll that out for the commercial market yet. That might be a thing year after or something, but we did launch a commercial market forecast this year. So that was new as well. So anyhow, stay tuned to the microsite for updates of what's going on with my little group and stuff. That's where you'll find most of the kind of new content things and things we're putting out. But yeah, that's kind of my world in a nutshell.
Well, that's it. I mean, and for our members, it's a dynamic environment, and for us, it's the same thing. We're trying to make sense of everything as it happens, and trying to make sure we're offering the best that we can to our members. So, thanks for coming here today and letting us know about some of these things. And I think we'll probably look to, when some of these new things are launching, we'll probably look to get you back to kind of talk them to our members and let them know about what the latest is. So thanks again. Really appreciate it. This has been a great chat, Andrew. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, and nice studio, by the way. Great new setup.
We love it.
Yeah.
The critical path that is data is one that's always shifting. What's available, what it tells us, how you access it. Your professional organization is committed to developing and delivering innovative data tools, reports, and products that'll help you stay on the leading curve. Thanks to Andrew for joining us today. Check out our new economics microsite, economics.gvrealtors.ca, and watch for new editions of his blog, The Lead, and other exciting new offerings in the coming weeks and months. I'm Jesse Lalime. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you down the next critical path.